In the early morning of March 2023, Roby Johnson, a US Air Force airman, started his day off as usual by drinking some coffee. Everything seemed fine at first, until Roby noticed a distinct smell in his drink, and opted not to drink it as he suspected foul play. I mention foul play because at the time, Roby and his soon-to-be ex-spouse, Melinda Johnson, were living together while going through a divorce. During this time, they were living in Germany, as Roby had been stationed there. As one would expect, their relationship problems had a negative impact on themselves and their only child. Roby was convinced that his partner was attempting to poison him to seek some form of revenge due to not having a successful marriage, and that she was trying to end his life to collect death benefits. While he did have these thoughts, he technically had no concrete evidence that she was in fact tampering with his drinks. However, he did believe that she was, and so while they stayed in Germany for the next few months, Roby would pretend to drink his morning coffee. It should also be mentioned that he knew that Melody would prepare his coffee pot to be ready at night, so that in the morning, he just needed to turn it on to make his coffee. It was during this time that he came up with the idea of recording his partner in the act of poisoning his drink, and so he decided that he would wait until they moved back home to set up hidden cameras and file a report on her. Finally, when they arrived back to America on the 28th of June 2023, they were once again temporarily stationed at a hotel in the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona. With his plan still in mind, he waited a few days until Melody left the hotel, and so when she finally left, Roby knew he had the opportunity to set up hidden cameras to finally see what was happening to his coffee, and as he expected, Melody was in fact putting some form of substance in his drink. This is what he caught on camera. With the evidence, he filed a report on Melody just the very next day on July 6. He showed the officers the video and explained to them about the whole situation that had been going on for months, adding on that he wasn't aware of what she was putting inside his coffee, but now he suspected she was pouring bleach into his coffee maker. However, despite the proof being presented, officers reportedly felt that the video was unclear and inconclusive, later stating that they couldn't really do that much since the substance that was being added was unknown. He then made another video in which he used pool testing strips to determine what was in his coffee pot, and the results showed high levels of chlorine.
Okay, let's see if it'll do anything. Look at that, totally changed. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Oh, and you can smell it. Like I can literally smell this. Fix this here. Yeah, I can literally smell this. You can see it sudsed up. Soapy. I guarantee it's slick too on the fingers.
With this new discovery and what the police told him earlier, Roby decided to buy multiple cameras with higher video quality, and so he set one of them up in their laundry room where the bleach was kept, another one was placed right over the coffee machine, and the third one showed the pass in between the two areas. Keep in mind they were all set up on the ceiling and were disguised as fire alarms to prevent any suspicion. Just the next day, on the 7th, they had moved back to permanent housing, and once again, after setting up all the cameras, Melody was caught messing around with the coffee maker. This time, everything was clear. Melody was indeed putting bleach into Roby's coffee maker. Roby would wait a couple of weeks to gather as much footage as possible and would present the evidence to the police on the 18th of July 2023. That same day, Melody Johnson was arrested and charged with attempted first-degree homicide, attempted aggravated assault, and adding poison to food or a drink. After a search of the home was conducted, officers stated that they found a container of liquid under their bathroom sink that smelled like bleach. She was later taken to the Pima County Adult Detention Center with a bond set at $250,000 because prosecutors argued that she was a possible flight risk, as she has family in the Philippines and recently bought a home there. After a long and daunting procedure, Melody pleaded guilty in attempting to poison Roby, but was controversially sentenced to 3 months of probation and had no additional jail time, as she originally faced up to 2 years in jail for each charge. It was even explained by the judge that Roby even told the court that he didn't want Melody to end up in prison, which many questioned this. However, he never elaborated his reasoning. On top of her probation, Melody Johnson was ordered to undergo a mental health evaluation and follow any of the recommendations prescribed to her. The judge also stated that Melody couldn't make any contact with Roby unless it's within a legal context. The Thunder River Rapids ride was a water-type ride located in Australia's biggest theme park, Dreamworld. The ride consisted of passengers boarding one of the several 6-person circular rafts. The raft would be set off and then sent the riders back past the ride's queue and into a cave. When exiting the cave, passengers would be exposed to the main rapid sections of the ride, which consisted of the ride going beside a large water catchment that contained the water storage for the ride. Following this, passengers would then be led under the Eureka Mountain Mine Ride Station, which was one of the park's Wild Mouse steel roller coasters that was later removed and replaced in November 2006 due to maintenance issues and due to parkgoers not going on what was once a popular ride. After passing by the Eureka's Mountain Mine Ride Station, riders would then make their way back towards his own station, with the ride then dropping off passengers abruptly after. Throughout its existence, Thunder River Rapids was considered to be a family-friendly ride due to how gently paced it was and being able to hold up to 6 passengers. But it's sad to say that one day, Thunder River's reputation as one of the park's biggest attractions would be completely disregarded, as a fatal accident would occur that would eventually lead to the attraction shutting down. On the 25th of October 2016, a tragic accident would take the lives of 4 victims. All 6 passengers were seated in Raft 5 and would make its way through the entire watercourse without any problem. It wasn't until the end of the ride before it was picked up by the conveyor and moved towards the elevated unloading area, in which a big safety issue would take place. At the time, the 6th raft was slightly ahead of the 5th one and was already dispatched at this point. However, it unexpectedly became stranded on the steel support rails situated at the end of the conveyor due to a failure of one of the 2 water pumps that are both essential for the ride's operation as they keep the water leveled. This meant that it was unable to reach the loading area, and just around a minute after, raft number 5 arrived. This resulted in the raft being lifted and pulled vertically into the conveyor mechanism, with the passengers either falling out of the raft or becoming trapped close to the conveyor mechanism. The 6 travelers were Kate Goodchild, who was alongside her older brother, Luke Dorset, and her child, Ebony. Cindy Lowe was another passenger who was also alongside her child, Kieran, and the last person being Ruzi Aragi, who was the partner of Luke Dorset. The ride operators and some other parkgoers nearby immediately responded to the situation by assisting the 6 trapped passengers in the raft and watercourse. The ride operators had shut down the conveyor and miraculously were able to save the 2 children after they were supported to climb out of the raft that was still in a vertical position and onto the nearby platforms. They thankfully faced little to no physical harm. However, the 4 other passengers were left to be horribly disfigured from crush and compression injuries from the conveyor belt, with the post-mortem report stating that most of the damage was towards the chest and abdominal area. Paramedic crews were quick to arrive on scene, but by the time they got there, all they could do was retrieve the bodies. To put it in perspective on how horrifying and grueling this accident was, several paramedic crew members were required some counseling just the very next day due to how traumatic it was. This accident resulted in not only the attraction being shut down, but the entire park would close down and reopen 3 days later on the 28th, as a public memorial would be on display for the 4 victims. But then, just the night before, a last-second decision was made that called off the reopening after local authorities were treating this accident as a crime scene, as they believed a lack of safety inspections and multiple violations of state workplace health and safety laws were committed. Just shortly after, on 9th of November, it was publicly announced that the Thunder River Rapids ride would be permanently closed out of respect to the victims and their families, and would instead be replaced by a memorial. The park would later reopen 6 weeks after the incident on the 10th of December 2016, and as you can imagine, many were hesitant to go back, and others believed that the park should be closed for much longer so that staff operators and members could receive some proper safety training. Despite this, the park was still up and running. As time passed on, many Patreons still remembered the tragic accident, and there were still many questions as to whether or not any of the park operators were going to be charged with anything, or if the park in general would receive some consequences. The families of the victims especially demanded that they receive some form of compensation, as they felt that the deaths of their loved ones was being swept under the rug by Dreamworld. And so years had gone by, and eventually on the 24th of February 2020, the Queensland coroner, James McDougall, released a final inquest report that mainly explored the workplace health and safety measures and problems with the park standards. As it was reported, Thunder River Rapids was broken down 7 times prior to the accident, with 5 of them being just a few days before the accident, and the 2 others being a few hours before the tragedy. What all these breakdowns had in common was due to pump failures, specifically the south pump stopping and disrupting the water levels, which, if you guys remember, was exactly what caused the deaths of the 4 victims. Another issue that was looked at were the ride operators. One of them was an experienced ride operator and safety representative named Peter Nemes, who had been working for Dreamworld for 4 years, with 2 of those years specifically on Thunder River Rapids. Alongside him was a newly trained operator named Courtney Williams. Also, when I say newly trained, that's not an exaggeration, as it was later reported that her induction training lasted approximately 15 to 20 minutes. And this was also her first day operating the ride. On top of this, since the training was clearly rushed, Courtney wasn't shown the emergency shutdown procedure and undertook only 2 to 3 test runs before guests were allowed to board the attraction. There was also another trainer who assisted Courtney when the ride was in operation named Amy Crisp, and while she did help Courtney with some procedures, such as showing her the evacuation points, where the unload area was located, showing her the functions of buttons on the main operator panel, and how to maneuver the rafts with her feet, a majority of the training was conducted while passengers were on board, and not beforehand. Adding on that she wasn't told that the water levels needed to be monitored, but thankfully this is something she already knew about. At around 25 minutes into the ride being open to the public, Courtney was given the role of operating the main control panel with Amy by her side. 45 minutes later, Courtney's full training would be considered complete, as she was deemed ready according to the other trainers and ride operators. Just shortly after this, the first pump breakdown would occur at 11:50 AM, while another operator was at the main control panel. It would take 30 minutes for it to be resolved, and once again, just 40 minutes later, that same south pump would fail. This was a quicker fix as it was only shut down for around 15 minutes. However, it was mentioned that whenever a ride shuts down 3 times during one day, the attraction would have to be closed for the remainder of the day. But if they were 2 exact malfunctions, the ride needed to be shut down and reported to an engineering supervisor within 24 hours. In this case, neither of those procedures happened. Also, keep in mind that the person who was resetting the ride was a park technician, not someone part of the electrical team, as it was mentioned that all other electrical team members were all occupied with other park issues. The ride would continue on, but at roughly 2:03 PM, yet again, the south pump would fail for the 3rd time, and as we all know by now, this failure would result in 4 deaths. While some may look at this and say it could have been just one bad day of poor operation, the inquest insisted that wasn't the case, and the real reasoning was from the lack of care of Dreamworld and its parent company at the time, Ardent Leisure. As the inquest pointed out, the ride had a history of breaking down. During the early startup procedures on the 18th of January 2021, a group of empty rafts collided in the unloaded area of the ride, which resulted in one of them flipping over. It was revealed through a coroner's report that there was little to no investigation through risk or engineering assessments, and a recommendation that was provided to conduct further training for emergency situations was never implemented. A few other accidents occurred throughout 2004 to 2014, but as expected, none of the new safety implementations or proper training procedures were conducted. As sad as it is to say, an accident was bound to happen due to complacency. After a full investigation, on the 21st of July 2020, Ardent Leisure was deemed responsible for the deaths of the 4 victims and was charged with 3 counts of failing to comply with health and safety legislation and exposing individuals to a risk of serious injury or death. All 3 charges were filed by the Work Health and Safety Prosecutor under the Work Health and Safety Act. Ardent Leisure pleaded guilty and were fined $3.6 million in September 2020. In addition, a settlement amount for $2.1 million, plus an additional $280,000 in costs and outlays. Cindy's husband, Matthew Lowe, sued Ardent Leisure and filed a claim for dependency costs and economic loss in June 2019 on behalf of their 2 children. In August 2023, Ardent Leisure finally settled on a $26 million shareholder class action lawsuit. In the end, all the other families, first responders, and witnesses that day also received some form of compensation. As of today, Thunder River Rapids has been completely demolished as a new roller coaster would take its place in 2021. In order to keep the memories of the victims alive, a memorial garden was created in March 2022. On the 30th of June 2025, in Bacabal, Brazil, a news reporter named Lenildo Frazao would be reporting live in the middle of the Marim River. The reasoning as to why he was reporting in the river was due to the death of a young girl named Riza. Tragically, Riza had passed away just a day prior due to a drowning accident. According to eyewitnesses, Riza was with a group of friends while at the river. However, where they decided to swim was locally known for its risky conditions because of its water heights, powerful currents, and the irregular level of water depths created by the holes in the riverbed. Despite this, many locals would still swim there, and so like others, they continued on with swimming until things became a problem. Just shortly after, screams of a young girl and signs of struggling to stay afloat were heard and seen by locals in the area. Her friends panicked and ran to seek assistance, but unfortunately by the time they got anyone's attention, Riza was long gone and nowhere to be seen. Now going back to the live news segment, Lenildo was at that same river, and as I mentioned earlier, he was demonstrating to viewers how dangerous the conditions were. Throughout the segment, you can see how high the water is, with it essentially being at the chest level. Combine that with its unpredictable water depths and strong currents, viewers were able to get an idea how dangerous this scenario was for Riza. The segment was going on as planned, but around the midway point, Lenildo would make a sinister discovery.
Pouquinho aqui, deixa eu ver aqui. Ó, vou andar mais. Ó a fundura aqui, ó. Ui. Eu acho que tinha um negócio aqui no fundo da água. Não, era mole.
As Lenildo took a step deeper into the river, he immediately panicked and noticed something was wrong as he would rush out of the river. While leaving the water, he stated to his other news crew members that he believed there was something down at the bottom of the water as he had felt something brushing against his leg. Unaware of what was beneath him, he told the camera crew that he wasn't going back in there due to fear. When asked about what he had felt, he explained that it felt like an arm, but also suggested that it was likely a fish instead, and that he was just paranoid of the entire situation surrounding Riza. Little did he know though, his first instinct would be correct. Just shortly after, the broadcast would go off air, and the news crew would contact local authorities on what just happened, as Lenildo later explained that he had a gut feeling that something horrible was in that river. Following the broadcast, divers and firefighters searched the area Lenildo and his crew were filming at, and as it turned out, they had located a girl's lifeless body in the river. After an autopsy was performed, it was revealed that the body did in fact belong to Riza. meaning that what Lenildo had bumped into earlier was likely her arm. Unfortunately, it seems that the incident had left a permanent mental scar on Lenildo, as he would later be interviewed regarding his experience, in which he stated this: "You never expect something like this to happen while doing your job. I'll never forget what I felt that day in the river.